The Manhattan courtroom was so full that the air itself felt tight. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, attorneys whispered last-minute strategies, and the hum of anticipation sat over everyone like a thin veil. At the center of it all stood Jeremy Carter, adjusting the cuffs of a suit that suddenly felt too small for the frame he was trying to hold tall. He rose from his chair to prepare for testimony, wanting to appear, calm, confident, and untouched by the scandal tearing at his life. But confidence deserted him the moment the courtroom doors opened. The sound echoed, sharp, commanding. Every head turned. Judge Hallie Johnson stepped inside, her robe flowing behind her with the collected authority of someone who had earned every inch of her place. Her chin lifted, gaze steady, movements precise. Jeremy's hand slipped on the folder he was holding. His jaw tightened. His chest rose too quickly. He went pale, because standing before him, beneath the polished courtroom lights, was the woman he abandoned when she was 7 months pregnant. The clerk stood and called out in a clear, unwavering voice, "All rise for Judge Johnson." The room obeyed. Chairs scraped, feet shuffled, and a wave of silence fell. Jeremy didn't just rise, he nearly stumbled. Sweat collected at his temples, despite the courtroom being comfortably cool. His throat tightened as he looked up and locked eyes with Hallie. She saw him, not as the billionaire CEO the world admired, not as the defendant who might lose his empire, but as the man who once promised her forever and left her holding a child he never came back for. Hallie's face shifted for only a fraction of a second, a flicker of recognition, a flicker of pain, but her expression reset with professional calm, like a steel door closing. She took her seat at the bench. Her gavel rested beside her hand. Jeremy felt the floor tilt beneath him. The crowd had no idea what history pulsed between them. They didn't know that his worst mistake had just walked into the room with the authority to judge him publicly. They didn't know that the power dynamic of their past had reversed in a single heartbeat. As Hallie shuffled her docket, the narrator's voice cuts through for viewers he abandoned. Her when she needed him most. Now she holds the gavel that could end his empire. Jeremy inhaled sharply, his breath shaky, and the words he had prepared for testimony evaporated. It took him 5 years to build his company, 15 years to forget Hallie, and 1 second to realize he never truly had. Hallie lowered her eyes to the file. Her voice, calm and measured, carried across the room. "Mr. Carter, please remain standing." Jeremy obeyed instantly. The power was hers now. The moment two lives that had broken apart slammed back together in the most public way possible. The courtroom braced for impact. The silence in the courtroom stretched thin, the kind of silence that forces people to confront their own thoughts. Jeremy stood there, pulse kicking hard in his neck, feeling exposed in a way he could never have imagined back when life was easy and every door opened for him. But it wasn't just his story unfolding. Have you ever trusted someone who promised they'd never leave, only to watch them walk away when life got real? Have you ever found yourself carrying the weight of a broken promise, raising yourself through pain, building strength from places you didn't know existed? Even though this was Jeremy and Hallie's courtroom, the feeling behind it belonged to thousands who've been hurt, abandoned, forgotten, or underestimated. Hallie sat with perfect composure, but underneath the robe was a woman who had rebuilt her world brick by brick, a woman who learned to rise without apologies, a woman who once cried in silence and now commanded an entire courtroom with a single breath. Have you ever wondered how life would feel if you were given the chance to stand face to face with the person who broke you, after you built yourself into someone they never thought you could become? This wasn't just a legal case. This wasn't just a courtroom moment. This was the universe bringing two unfinished stories to the same page. Because everyone has lived through some form of heartbreak that demanded strength they didn't think they had. This is the moment the story becomes personal, not just for Hallie, not just for Jeremy, but for every viewer who knows what it means to survive disappointment and rise higher than anyone expected. Jeremy forced himself to breathe steadily, but every inhale felt shallow, tight. The attorney beside him whispered something meant to reassure him, but the words faded under the pressure building inside him. Hallie glanced over her file, preparing to begin the session. Then she lifted her eyes, straight at Jeremy. He opened his mouth to answer the simplest procedural question. His voice cracked, not once, but twice. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough for the entire courtroom to sense something was off. Heads in the gallery tilted toward him, catching the tremble he couldn't disguise. Even the stenographer paused briefly. Jeremy swallowed hard, gripped the witness stand, and tried again. But the second attempt collapsed into the same shaky whisper. Hallie's gaze didn't move, didn't blink, didn't reveal even a fraction of the storm that flickered beneath the robe. She simply raised her hand, firm and controlled, and brought the gavel down in one sharp tap. Crack! The sound rippled through the courtroom, stopping whispers instantly. Jeremy flinched. The prosecutor stiffened. Even the bailiff's posture sharpened. Something was happening that went beyond legal proceedings. Even if they didn't know the truth, everyone could feel an old wound reopening between the judge and the defendant, one that had nothing to do with documents or financial records. One woman rebuilt her entire life from heartbreak to honor, while the man who ran from responsibility finally finds nowhere left to hide. This was the second peak moment, the instant where Hallie's authority crushed any illusion Jeremy had left of controlling the situation. He wasn't the billionaire CEO now. He wasn't the man who could buy silence or negotiate power. He was simply Jeremy Carter, a man standing in front of the woman he wronged, answering for choices he buried years ago. This wasn't just a trial. This was accountability catching up in the most unexpected place. The tension tightened, electric and unavoidable. Hallie leaned slightly forward, her tone steady but unmistakably firm. "Mr. Carter, please speak clearly. This is a court of record." Another crack in Jeremy's composure. Another wave of truth surfacing. The past wasn't just returning, it was confronting him publicly, and he had nowhere to escape. Jeremy stood frozen at the stand, his breath uneven, his confidence draining faster than he could collect himself. The courtroom watched quietly, sensing tension far deeper than a simple case. Hallie's expression remained controlled, but her eyes held a steadiness, shaped by years of rebuilding herself from the pain he left behind. So now the question becomes, what will Hallie do with this moment? Will she choose justice or revenge? And what happens when their 10-year-old son walks into the hallway after court, looks up at the man who abandoned him, and calls him Dad for the first time? The weight of that single word, Dad, hangs like a promise and a reckoning. This is the crossroads. This is the story's true battle. Not the legal charges, not the headlines, but the consequences of a choice made years ago, now returning in the form of a child who never asked to be caught between two adults. Stay with me, because this moment will test everything: love, regret, forgiveness, and the courage it takes to face the damage we leave behind. Before we go deeper, please take a moment to like this video and drop a comment on where you're watching from. It helps YouTube share this story with more amazing viewers, and your support means everything to this channel. Welcome back to Mr. Graham's Stories, where life's most powerful lessons come wrapped in unforgettable tales. If you're new to this family, thank you for joining us. Please hit the subscribe button because it helps us share inspiring stories like this on YouTube. Now, let's begin the journey. The courtroom felt smaller than usual that morning, even though every bench was filled. Reporters balanced their notebooks on their knees. Attorneys reviewed, highlighted documents, and spectators whispered about the high-profile case on the docket. Yet none of them had any idea that the most explosive moment of the day had nothing to do with corporate fraud. It had everything to do with two people who once shared a life that broke apart. Jeremy Carter stood at the witness stand, tugging gently on the edge of his suit jacket, as if adjusting the fabric could steady his pulse. His confidence was a performance he had perfected over the years, chin raised, shoulders even, eyes forward. But the confidence wasn't holding. Not today. The bailiff glanced toward the double doors at the back of the room. A quiet shift of movement followed, and the doors opened with a clean, echoing swing. Judge Hallie Johnson entered, and the world inside that courtroom tilted. Jeremy didn't just see a judge walking to the bench. He saw the woman he once held close on a Manhattan rooftop, the woman he abandoned when her belly carried the child they created together. The folders in his hands slipped, nearly falling before he caught them with trembling fingers. His breathing turned shallow, almost ragged. For a man known for controlling entire industries, losing control of his own breath felt like punishment. Hallie strode forward with a balance that came from years of discipline. Her robe shifted gently as she approached the bench, the weight of her authority unmistakable. Even from across the room, Jeremy could see how composed she was, chin set, shoulders straight, gaze steady. Yet he knew her well enough to catch the smallest flicker in her eyes. A shock, a memory, a wound. The clerk rose. "All rise for Judge Johnson," she announced. Everyone stood. Jeremy tried to rise too quickly, and his knee bumped the chair behind him. A scrape echoed across the room. His attorney shot him a confused side look, but Jeremy kept his eyes on Hallie, as if afraid she might disappear if he blinked. Hallie sat down at the bench, her expression collected and unreadable. She lifted her docket and spoke with a calm voice that resonated across the polished walls. "Be seated." Jeremy lowered himself slowly, hoping no one would see the way his hand shook when he gripped the edge of the stand. His mind rushed through memories he had buried years ago. Hallie laughing during late-night walks, Hallie resting her head on his shoulder, Hallie holding her belly with quiet hope. Now she was the judge overseeing the case that threatened everything he had built. Life had a way of circling back with consequences. The prosecutor cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Even he sensed something unusual, though he had no idea what history pulsed between judge and defendant. He simply noted Jeremy's odd demeanor and the tension that filled the room like an invisible pressure. Hallie glanced over the documents in front of her, but Jeremy could feel the weight of her presence even without her gaze on him. He fought the urge to lower his head. Instead, he forced himself to sit upright, though the confidence he tried to project looked thin and brittle. The bailiff shifted slightly. Jeremy recognized that shift. It meant the judge was about to begin. "Mr. Carter," Hallie began, her tone steady. "We are proceeding with today's testimony. Please remain focused and respond clearly. This is a court of record." Her voice cut through him, not harsh, not emotional, just formal. But beneath the tone, he heard the echo of the past, the voice that once whispered dreams, not legal instructions. He opened his mouth to answer. His voice cracked. A few people in the gallery exchanged glances. Jeremy swallowed and tried again, but the sound wavered just enough for the prosecutor to lift an eyebrow. Jeremy closed his eyes briefly, wishing for strength, composure, anything that could keep him from falling apart in front of the one woman he once failed. Hallie reached for her gavel and tapped it once, firm, decisive. The sound shot through Jeremy's chest. She wasn't reacting to him emotionally. She was managing her courtroom. But in that single tap, he felt judgment beyond the legal case. He felt the weight of everything he had left undone. The attorneys at both tables grew still, sensing tension they couldn't explain. Jeremy knew they wondered if he was cracking under pressure because of the case itself. They had no clue the real pressure came from the woman presiding over it. Hallie turned her attention to the prosecutor. "You may proceed." As the questioning began, Jeremy forced himself to focus, but every word spoken felt heavier than the last. His palms were damp. His throat tightened with every attempt to speak smoothly. He could feel Hallie's presence guiding the room, commanding order with a quiet strength that reminded him exactly why he once fell for her. This was the most public moment of his downfall, and somehow the most private too. Sometimes life brings us face to face with the pain we thought we escaped, not to punish us, but to remind us of the truth we never confronted. Jeremy tried to steady himself, but the emotional collision happening inside him made even simple answers feel like mountains he couldn't climb. This was only the beginning. If this story already has your heart racing, hit the like button and tell us in the comments if you believe people deserve second chances. Your support helps us grow this family and bring more powerful stories to life. The prosecutor stepped forward, organizing his papers with deliberate calm. "Mr. Carter, let's continue from where we left off yesterday," he said, nodding politely before glancing toward Judge Hallie Johnson. "With the court's permission, of course." Hallie gave a single measured nod. "Proceed." Jeremy swallowed tightly, wishing he could ask for a glass of water without looking weak. But the courtroom already saw enough to sense his discomfort. The once confident billionaire now looked unsure of his footing, a man trying to stand steady in shoes that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Every move he made was being observed, by reporters, by attorneys, by strangers waiting to witness the downfall of a powerful figure. But none of them had the vantage point Hallie had. She saw more than a CEO on the stand. She saw the man she once trusted sit there wrestling with fear he couldn't hide. "Mr. Carter," the prosecutor began, flipping through pages. "You oversaw the financial strategy team, correct?" Jeremy nodded faintly. "Yes." "Speak clearly, please," Hallie reminded him, her tone firm but even. Her voice felt like a spotlight he couldn't escape. He straightened. "Yes, Your Honor." The prosecutor continued. "And you were aware of the projections tied to the overseas shipments?" Jeremy hesitated. That pause triggered murmurs from the gallery. His attorney shifted in his seat, obviously uncomfortable. Hallie observed the hesitation, her expression steady. She wasn't reacting emotionally. She was reading him with the sharpness of someone trained to catch truth in the spaces between words. "Yes," Jeremy replied finally, though the uncertainty lacing his tone betrayed him. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "So you were aware? Yet documents presented to this court showed discrepancies you personally signed off on. How do you explain that?" Jeremy felt the walls close in. He knew how this looked. He knew the evidence didn't lie. He also knew none of this compared to the weight he felt from Hallie's presence. Just inches away, judging the man he had been, not just the CEO he had become. He steadied himself and answered, "The signatures were part of a routine approval system. I didn't personally review every line. I trusted my team." Hallie cut in. "Responsibility cannot be delegated when your signature is involved, Mr. Carter. You know that." The courtroom fell still. Jeremy felt those words land with the force of something deeper, something beyond legal duty. It was a reminder of the past, wrapped in judicial formality, responsibility, a word he once avoided at the worst possible time. He lowered his gaze slightly. "Yes, Your Honor." The prosecutor observed the dynamic with curiosity. Jeremy's demeanor was unusual for a man used to negotiating under pressure. Something else was at play, though the prosecutor could not name it. Meanwhile, Hallie maintained control of the room with the effortless authority she had earned. Every gesture was deliberate, her pen tapping softly against the bench as she reviewed notes, her eyes moving between attorneys with focused attention. She did not let emotion leak through, but inside she fought the old ache rising like a tide, the memory of being left alone with a child growing inside her while Jeremy ran from the truth. Back on the stand, Jeremy's thoughts scattered as the prosecutor continued, presenting documents, emails, authorizations, internal memos. Each piece of evidence chipped away at the image Jeremy carefully crafted over the years. But nothing hit him harder than the knowledge that Hallie was seeing all of this. He glanced up once, only to find her looking at him with the same calm expression she showed every defendant. No anger, no softness, just fairness. And that fairness hurt more than anger ever could. It showed how far she had risen without him, how strong she became alone. He tried to gather himself. He tried to summon the composure he once wielded with ease. But every memory of the past, every moment with Hallie, every moment he abandoned, kept slipping into the cracks of his confidence. His attorney leaned toward him discreetly. "You need to stay focused," he whispered. "The jury is watching everything." Jeremy nodded, but his attempt to regain control faltered when he noticed one juror studying him with thinly veiled suspicion. Another juror leaned forward, tracking his every response. The pressure intensified. "Mr. Carter," the prosecutor said suddenly, snapping Jeremy's attention back. "Did you or did you not approve compensations tied to inflated projections?" Jeremy's throat tightened. He started to answer, but Hallie lifted a hand slightly. "Answer clearly, please." He closed his eyes for a brief moment. "Yes," he whispered. "Louder, Mr. Carter." "Yes," he repeated, voice unsteady. The prosecutor nodded slowly as if that single admission aligned the entire case. "So, you acknowledge your involvement?" Jeremy tried to respond, but emotion tightened his chest. He wasn't just facing consequences for a business decision. He was feeling the weight of a life he fractured long ago, now reflected, back through Hallie's poise, her strength, her quiet dignity. When the prosecutor finished his line of questioning, Hallie leaned back in her chair, considering Jeremy for a long moment. She didn't reveal a single thought on her face, but the shift in power was unmistakable. Jeremy Carter, the man who once walked away from responsibility, now stood powerless before the woman he had left behind. Hallie turned to the prosecutor. "We will take a brief recess." Her gavel tapped once, steady as a heartbeat. Jeremy exhaled shakily, gripping the stand to keep himself upright. He had survived years of board meetings, investor negotiations, and pressure from competitors. Yet a single session under Hallie's authority had shaken him to his core. Power changes hands in ways we never expect. Sometimes the person we once broke becomes the one who shows us who we truly are. Jeremy glanced toward Hallie one last time before she stepped away. Her back remained straight, every movement controlled. She didn't look at him again. The message was clear. Life had shifted, and Jeremy was no longer the one in control. When recess was announced, the courtroom shifted into a low murmur of voices. Attorneys stretched their necks, reporters scribbled rapid notes, and spectators exchanged theories about how the trial might unfold. None of them knew that the real story wasn't about legal strategies. It was about the quiet storm building beneath the judge's robe and the unraveling confidence of the man on the stand. Jeremy sank into his seat, running his fingers across the edge of the witness box as if searching for something sturdy to hold on to. His attorney attempted reassurance with a half-hearted pat on the arm, but even he could sense that the tension in the room came from a place beyond business. Across the courtroom, Hallie stepped into her private chamber. She closed the door, leaned against it for a moment, and inhaled slowly. For the first time that morning, she let her shoulders drop. Not because of fear, she left fear behind a long time ago, but because the past had collided with her current reality with a force strong enough to rattle anyone. She walked toward the small mirror mounted on the wall. Her reflection stared back with calm eyes, steady posture, but a tightness around the mouth she recognized immediately. Old wounds had muscle memory. No matter how much healing took place, certain faces, certain moments, certain histories could tug on threads she had learned to manage. But she was not that young woman anymore. She was a Harlem daughter, raised on resilience, strengthened by culture, shaped by communities that pulled one another up when life knocked them down. She whispered under her breath, "Stay focused, Hallie." Her mother used to say that Harlem women carried both grit and grace in their bones. Hallie brushed a stray hair behind her ear and centered herself. She wasn't just a woman facing her past. She was the judge entrusted to uphold fairness, no matter who stood before her. Meanwhile, Jeremy remained near the stand, staring at the courtroom door Hallie had just disappeared through. Memories broke through his thoughts like sharp flashes. Hallie laughing during a block party in Harlem. Hallie insisting they support her cousin's art showcase. Hallie talking about justice with fire in her voice, long before law school. Hallie resting tired feet on his lap during evenings they once shared. He remembered loving her strength. He remembered being intimidated by it. He remembered leaving anyway. A bailiff approached him. "You may step down for recess, Mr. Carter." Jeremy nodded, feeling oddly grateful for the chance to breathe somewhere other than the witness seat. He walked toward his attorney, who whispered, "Get your head together. You're losing the room." But it wasn't the room he was losing. It was the sense of superiority he had worn for years. He walked stiffly toward the hallway, every step feeling heavier than the last. The contrast between his world and Hallie's grew more vivid in his mind with every breath he took. He had been raised in midtown privilege, private tutors, pristine apartments, clubs where doormen greeted him by name. In that world, mistakes could be hidden behind expensive lawyers and press statements. Hallie came from Harlem roots, family gatherings where voices overlapped with laughter, church elders who spoke truth with love, neighbors who treated struggle as a stepping stone rather than a defeat. It was a world where people built futures through endurance rather than connections, a world that shaped Hallie into the woman who now stood in judgment of him. For a moment, Jeremy understood exactly why she had risen so far while he had been stumbling behind his own ego. The hallway was crowded with reporters hoping to catch glimpses of attorneys. Jeremy tried to avoid eye contact, but several cameras lifted toward him. His attorney intercepted immediately, shielding him from questions. Inside her chambers, Hallie reviewed case notes. She forced herself to examine every detail with complete neutrality. She owed the people of New York fairness. She owed the judicial system her objectivity, but she also owed herself honesty. She remembered holding her son alone, exhausted and uncertain, bracing for a future she wasn't sure she was ready to face. She remembered studying for exams while rocking a stroller with her foot. She remembered every moment she carried the weight of abandonment while Jeremy built his empire. Yet here she was, stronger, wiser, and sitting in the very seat people doubted she would ever reach. When recess ended, Hallie re-entered the courtroom with her composure fully restored. Her robe seemed to settle around her like armor. The murmurs died instantly as she approached the bench. "All rise." Once seated, Hallie's eyes briefly crossed Jeremy's. No warmth, no anger, only professionalism. "Court is now back in session," she stated. "Mr. Carter, please step forward." Jeremy hesitated. Just a second, but long enough for the shift in power to become undeniable. He obeyed and returned to the stand. His footsteps echoed, each one sounding louder in his mind than in the room. The prosecutor resumed questioning, this time diving into the financial records that painted a damaging picture. Hallie listened with the focus of a woman who earned her place through perseverance. She asked pointed questions of both sides, demonstrating the sharp intellect that had carried her from Harlem classrooms to this bench of authority. Jeremy struggled to meet her gaze when she addressed him directly, not out of fear of legal repercussions, but because her strength reflected everything he had thrown away. "Mr. Carter," Hallie said, "you will answer the next set of questions without hesitation or ambiguity. Clarity is essential." "Yes, Your Honor." His voice barely carried. The trial continued, each exchange layered with tension neither could ignore. The courtroom watched as the power dynamic played out in front of them, Hallie standing, firm in her authority, Jeremy unraveling under the weight of his mistakes. When the final question of the session was posed, Hallie looked at Jeremy for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't bitter. It was a recognition, a silent acknowledgement of everything unspoken between them. Once the prosecutor concluded, Hallie closed her docket and announced, "Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning." Her gavel struck once. Jeremy exhaled hard, almost stumbling as he stepped away from the stand. He rushed toward the doors, breathless, shaken, unable to face a single reporter. His attorney hurried after him, calling his name. In life, some confrontations are unavoidable. Some truths cannot be buried forever. Today was not just a trial. It was a reckoning, one born from heartbreak, responsibility, and the strength of a woman who refused to be defeated. The first time Hallie met Jeremy, she wasn't thinking about romance. She was thinking about her article deadline and how she needed at least 3 compelling interviews to complete her write-up on community donors. The charity gala was held in a glass-walled ballroom downtown, glowing. With city lights that flickered like diamonds against the windows, musicians played soft jazz near the stage, and servers weaved between guests with trays of sparkling drinks. Hallie stood near the edge of the room, notebook in hand, observing quietly, the way she always did when she entered a space filled with wealthy donors. She felt comfortable anywhere, but nights like this reminded her of Harlem's warmth, crowded block parties. The smell of collard greens drifting through apartment hallways, elders greeting her by name. She didn't grow up around people who owned skyscrapers. She grew up around people who built community with their hands. Jeremy Carter entered the gala like someone accustomed to being recognized, though he carried himself without arrogance. His suit was sharp, his stride confident, and his attention honed on a group of organizers thanking him for sponsoring a music mentorship program. Hallie noticed him because he kept asking genuine questions about the kids, the teachers, the instruments needed. He didn't just write a check. He listened. Their worlds were nothing alike, yet the moment he turned toward her, something shifted. Hallie lifted her chin, preparing to introduce herself as a reporter. But Jeremy spoke first. "You're Hallie Johnson, right? You wrote that feature about youth arts programs uptown." She blinked, surprised. "You read that?" He smiled. "I don't read everything, but that one stayed with me." There was nothing flashy about the compliment. It wasn't rehearsed or exaggerated. He said it with the tone of someone who had genuinely admired her work. Hallie felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. She extended her hand. "I'm writing a follow-up piece tonight. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" "Ask as many as you want," Jeremy said, shaking her hand with a warmth that caught her off guard. "I like talking to people who care about real change." They stepped aside from the crowd, finding a quiet space near the windows where the city spread out beneath them. Hallie began with her prepared questions, but Jeremy's answers kept drifting back to her instead. He asked about her childhood in Harlem, about the jazz her father loved, about the reason she chose storytelling as her tool for impact. The more they talked, the more the room seemed to fade. A violinist shifted into a smooth melody, and Jeremy nodded toward the music. "Do you dance?" "I do," she said lightly. "But I don't know if I trust you yet." He laughed. "Then give me one song to change your mind." Hallie hesitated for exactly 1 second before slipping her hand into his. The moment their fingers touched, she felt something gentle, something she hadn't expected from a man who walked confidently through a world built on wealth. Jeremy led her to the dance floor. His movements were careful, not presumptuous. Hallie rested her other hand on his shoulder, noticing the steady rhythm of his breathing as he matched the tempo perfectly. "You're not bad at this," she teased. "Good," he said softly. "I was hoping to impress you." The honesty in his tone disarmed her. She didn't respond with flirtation. Instead, she met his eyes and saw sincerity, plain, unfiltered sincerity. As the music swayed, Jeremy leaned closer, not to claim space, but to share it. "Tell me more about Harlem," he said. "Tell me what shapes you." Hallie smiled. "You want to understand? Then you'll have to come see it. Harlem isn't a story someone can summarize. It's a place you feel. That night, he did more listening than talking, and Hallie found herself, revealing pieces of her world, pieces she rarely shared at formal events. She told him about the choir practices that shook the walls of her childhood church, about the local artists who painted their dreams across brick walls, about her grandmother's voice rising in prayer during tough times. She spoke about community meals where no one left hungry, even if money was tight. Jeremy listened as if each detail mattered deeply. "Your world sounds beautiful," he said. "It is," Hallie replied, "if you know how to look." Their dance ended, but neither stepped away. Jeremy asked, "Would you let me see it? The real Harlem?" She laughed, not in dismissal but in delight. "Are you ready for that?" "Absolutely." A warmth spread through her chest, unexpected, magnetic. She wasn't falling for his wealth or his polished demeanor. She was falling for the way he made space for her, the way he valued what she valued, the way he looked at her as though she was more fascinating than anything else in the room. The gala ended with Jeremy walking Hallie to her ride, both of them talking about nothing and everything all at once. Before she stepped inside, he hesitated. "Hallie," he said, voice gentle, "I'd really like to see you again." She held his gaze, feeling an unfamiliar sweetness bloom inside her. "Then ask me properly." He grinned, nervous but sincere. "Would you go out with me tomorrow night?" "Yes," she whispered before closing the door. As the car pulled away, Hallie pressed her fingers to her lips, surprised by how alive she felt. Jeremy Carter wasn't Harlem. He wasn't her world, but he made her feel seen, and that was how it began. Harlem meeting Midtown, soul meeting ambition, two people, building something tender before either realized how fragile it could be. Their relationship unfolded with a glow that felt effortless, the kind of connection that settles into two people without warning. After the charity gala, Jeremy and Hallie found themselves stepping into a rhythm that felt natural. Morning texts, evening calls, weekend strolls through neighborhoods they each loved. Their differences didn't divide them, they made everything richer. Jeremy introduced Hallie to his world the way a man introduces someone he genuinely wants beside him. He took her to rooftop dinners overlooking Times Square, to investor events where he proudly introduced her as someone brilliant you should know, and to quiet upscale cafes where he confessed his dreams between sips of tea. When he brought her to a gala a month later, he didn't just guide her through the crowd, he watched her light it up. And Hallie, in turn, showed him the parts of New York most people with his background never saw. She brought him to the Apollo, where the music shook the room with history. She walked with him through Harlem streets, lined with murals painted by local artists who told stories through color. They ate at small family-owned restaurants where the food tasted like home, and he learned that her favorite comfort dish was anything her grandmother made. "Your world has more life than mine ever has," Jeremy admitted one evening as they walked through a lively block gathering, the drums echoing off the pavement. "That's because here, you're allowed to breathe," Hallie replied with a smile. Their connection deepened with every shared moment. Jeremy admired her conviction, her empathy, her ability to see people, not just circumstances. Hallie admired his curiosity, his willingness to listen, his desire to understand what mattered to her. For the first time in years, Jeremy felt like a man rather than a businessman. And Hallie felt seen in a way she didn't expect from someone raised on the opposite side of privilege. Months passed, each one weaving their lives closer together. They spent late nights on the phone planning imaginary trips, early mornings sharing pastries before work, and quiet Sundays in Central Park lying on a blanket while the wind rustled the leaves above them. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real, warm, growing, and hopeful. One crisp October evening, Jeremy invited Hallie to a private terrace overlooking Central Park. Lanterns lined the balcony, and the city below glittered like a dream. Jeremy guided her forward, his hand soft at her waist, his breath steady even as nerves tightened inside him. "I want to talk to you about something important," he said. His voice trembled slightly, but not from fear, from anticipation. Hallie tilted her head with a curious smile. "You're scaring me. What is it?" He reached for her hands and held them tightly. "Hallie, we're going to have a baby." Her breath stopped for a moment. "What? How do you—" "I just came from the doctor," he said, touching her cheek gently. "I had been worried something was wrong with me. Turns out, nothing's wrong. Everything is perfect. We're having a baby. You are carrying my baby." Hallie felt her heart expand in her chest. The realization washed over her like warm sunlight, and tears filled. Her eyes, not from fear but from joy so pure she could barely breathe. Jeremy pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet as she cried against his shoulder. "We're having a family," he whispered. "I've never been so certain of anything." She laughed through tears. "I can't believe this. I can't believe we're going to be parents." Jeremy kissed her forehead, and they held each other for a long time, letting the city's glow wrap around them like a blessing. In the weeks that followed, their joy was unmistakable. They walked through baby stores, teasing each other about future names. They debated which neighborhood would be best for raising a child. Jeremy told his colleagues that he was becoming a father, and Hallie confided in her closest friends. Their excitement felt unshakable, but cracks began to appear, small, quiet ones that Hallie didn't recognize at first. Jeremy was always ambitious, but now that his company was gaining traction, his hunger for expansion grew even sharper. Meetings stretched longer. Calls interrupted their dinners. Anxiety clouded his eyes in ways he tried hard to hide. He still held Hallie at night, but the warmth felt thinner. His mind drifted even when his body stayed beside her. One evening, as Hallie prepared dinner in her Harlem apartment, she noticed Jeremy sitting by the window staring at the city with a troubled expression. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Nothing. Just thinking. About..." He hesitated. "Responsibilities, expectations, whether I'm enough." Hallie walked over and took his hand. "You're going to be an amazing father." He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Over the next month, the pressure inside Jeremy grew. His colleagues whispered doubts about how fatherhood might affect his dedication. Investors subtly warned him about distraction. One associate remarked, "A child changes everything, especially for men running companies." Those words lodged themselves deep inside him. Instead of turning to Hallie for reassurance, Jeremy retreated into himself. He convinced himself he wasn't strong enough to balance both worlds. He convinced himself he would fail her. He convinced himself she deserved stability he feared he couldn't provide. And one night, 6 months into her pregnancy, Jeremy made the most misguided choice of his life. Hallie came home from a prenatal appointment feeling exhausted but hopeful. She walked into the kitchen, expecting to see him waiting. Instead, she found a folded letter on the table. Her hands shook as she opened it. "I'm sorry. I can't do this. You deserve someone better. I never meant to hurt you. I just can't be what you need. I'll leave the door unlocked if you want to say goodbye." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Her heart cracked with a pain she had never felt before, deeper than disappointment, sharper than betrayal. She clutched her belly, whispering apologies to the child inside her. She couldn't understand how the man who held her with so much care could walk away with so little explanation. She sank onto the couch, crying into her hands, realizing she was now facing motherhood alone. And Jeremy Carter, the man who once danced with her under city lights, had left her, behind with their unborn child and a future she would now have to build on her own. The night Hallie found that letter, the world felt unbearably quiet. Her apartment, usually filled with late-night jazz or the hum of the city drifting through the windows, became a hollow space. She sat on the couch with Jeremy's words trembling in her hands, reading them again and again, as if the ink might rearrange itself into something kinder, something she could understand. But the meaning didn't change. He was gone. Her body curled instinctively around her stomach, arms folding protectively over the life forming inside her. She whispered, "It's okay, baby. I'm right here," though her own voice cracked with exhaustion and disbelief. Tears slipped down her cheeks, falling on the letter that had shattered everything. She thought she knew about love, commitment, and the future she had planned. She cried until her throat felt raw. Then she wiped her face, took a trembling breath, and stood. If Jeremy had chosen to walk away, then she would choose, again and again if she had to stand on her own. Harlem didn't let her break in silence. The next morning, Hallie visited her parents to tell them the truth. She had tried to hide her hurt behind a calm expression, but her mother saw through it instantly. One look at Hallie's swollen eyes and tightened jaw, and she opened her arms without a word. Hallie collapsed against her shoulder, releasing everything she had tried to hold together. Her father sat beside them, rubbing her back gently. "Baby, you're not alone," he murmured. "You never were." That night, her grandmother came by with warm soup and her steady presence. She cupped Hallie's cheeks, looked her straight in the eyes and said, "You are strong because you come from strong people. This child will know love, not because of who walked away, but because of who stayed. Those words became a light inside Hallie, a truth she carried forward even when the path felt unforgiving. In the months that followed, Harlem wrapped its arms around her. Neighbors brought groceries when they knew money was tight. Church members checked on her after appointments. Friends took turns accompanying her to doctor visits so she never had to sit alone in waiting rooms. Even her pastor stopped by often, praying with her and reminding her that hardship didn't define her story. It shaped her strength. Despite her support system, the journey was far from easy. Pregnancy required energy she didn't always have, especially when juggling jobs to support herself. She worked part-time as a paralegal during the day and assisted at the local library on weekends. She studied for her LSAT during late-night hours, eyes burning as she reviewed case briefs with her growing belly pressing against the desk. Some nights she fell asleep over her notes, waking with a stiff neck and the realization that she had another full day ahead. But every time fatigue threatened to overwhelm her, she placed a hand on her stomach and found her reason again. The small kicks reminded her that she wasn't fighting alone. She attended childbirth classes with her best friend sitting beside her. She practiced breathing techniques in her tiny living room. She decorated a simple crib with hand-me-down blankets from her neighbors. She learned how to swaddle using a teddy bear that one of the church youth group kids had given her. Each step made the reality clearer. She was going to be someone's mother, someone's anchor, someone's world. One early morning, after hours of labor, she gave birth to a boy with warm brown skin and bright, curious eyes. She named him Taylor, choosing a name strong enough for the child who had carried her through heartbreak even before he took his first breath. The moment she held him, her tears returned, not from pain or fear, but from awe. Taylor didn't know abandonment. He didn't know broken promises. All he knew was the warmth of his mother's arms and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. "You're everything I needed," she whispered into his tiny forehead. Those first months tested her in ways she never expected. The elevator in her building broke for 2 weeks, forcing her to climb 4 flights of stairs carrying a stroller, diaper bags, and Taylor in her arms. She learned how to warm bottles with one hand and jot down legal notes with the other. She rocked Taylor to sleep in the quiet of the night, whispering stories about courage, kindness, and the dreams she believed he would one day chase. Yet even in the thick of exhaustion, Hallie refused to let her goals fade. She finished law school applications between feeding schedules and nap times. When she began classes, she attended lectures with determination so fierce that classmates often wondered how she managed it all. She carried flashcards in her purse, highlighting case law while commuting on the subway. Sometimes she studied while pushing Taylor's stroller through the park, reviewing legal concepts, aloud as if she were teaching her son the meaning of justice before he could speak. There were moments she wanted to quit, moments when the weight of motherhood and academia pressed on her chest so heavily she could hardly breathe. But every time she doubted herself, she thought of Harlem's legacy, of people who had faced adversity with courage, not because it was easy, but because giving up wasn't an option. Hallie pushed forward, and slowly, her efforts bore fruit. She earned top marks. Professors noticed her discipline. She secured internships at legal aid organizations where she helped families facing hardships that echoed her own struggles. With each new step, she became more confident in the voice she was shaping, one rooted in fairness, empathy, and resilience. By the time she passed the bar exam, Taylor was toddling around the living room, cheering every time she closed a textbook. "Mommy done?" he would ask, clapping his small hands. Almost, she'd smile, lifting him into her arms. "We're almost there." Years later, when Hallie stood in the courtroom wearing her judge's robe for the first time, she looked at Taylor, now older, proud, and smiling from the gallery, and felt something settle into place inside her. She hadn't just survived abandonment. She had transformed it. She had risen. And Taylor, he was the reason she kept climbing. Hallie's years in law school were some of the hardest she had ever lived through, not because she doubted her intelligence, but because life demanded more from her than it did from almost anyone else in her classes. While her peers studied late into the night in quiet apartments or spacious dorm rooms, Hallie studied with Taylor asleep in her lap, textbooks propped on pillows, and her laptop balanced on the arm of a worn sofa. Her determination became a quiet legend among classmates. Professors noticed her sharp insights and her unwavering commitment to justice. But not everyone praised her journey. As a black woman stepping into a field filled with gatekeepers who often doubted her potential, she faced moments that could have broken a different kind of spirit. Some professors treated her as though her achievements were surprising rather than earned. Some classmates made assumptions about her background or questioned her ability to manage motherhood and rigorous academics. There were nights she walked home from class with her jaw clenched, refusing to let the sting of bias cloud her purpose. But Harlem had raised her to stand tall. Her grandmother always told her, "Your voice matters, even when people don't want to hear it. Use it." So she did. During her second year, Hallie excelled in constitutional law. During her third, she dominated mock trial competitions. Clerks whispered to professors about her skill. Legal aid offices requested her for difficult cases. Her reputation grew, not because she tried to be the loudest in the room, but because she consistently became the most prepared. Meanwhile, Taylor grew up watching his mother's strength. By age 4, he learned to sit quietly with a book whenever she needed to study. By age 6, he proudly announced to anyone who would listen, "My mom's going to be a judge one day." Hallie would laugh and say, "Let's start with graduating first," though her heart always warmed at his belief in her. After graduating near the top of her class, Hallie began her legal career at a community law center. She fought for tenants facing eviction, families navigating custody battles, and people who had never before known someone willing to speak up for them. Her work caught the attention of senior judges who admired her balance of empathy and precision. Eventually, she secured a clerkship under a well-respected New York judge who mentored her through the procedures, ethics, and responsibilities of the bench. She learned how to manage a courtroom not by mimicking those before her, but by integrating her own sense of fairness, guided by Harlem's lessons, her mother's teachings, and the resilience life had forced her to develop. Years passed, and Hallie's reputation evolved into something undeniable. She was a force, a voice of reason, a protector of truth. People described her as sharp, compassionate, steady, and unwavering when justice demanded strength. It didn't take long for opportunities to find her. When the state announced an opening for a new judge appointment, Hallie's colleagues encouraged her to apply. She hesitated at first, not from doubt, but from understanding the weight such a role carried. She would hold people's futures in her decisions. She needed to be certain she was ready. One evening, she sat at the dining table reviewing the application documents while Taylor worked on homework beside her. "You should do it," he said suddenly, without looking up. Hallie blinked. "Do what, baby?" "The judge thing," he replied, scribbling math problems. "You already act like a judge. You tell the truth all the time." She laughed, softly. "It takes more than telling the truth." "Yeah, but you make people feel safe," Taylor said, looking up at her with earnest eyes. "Judges should do that too, so you should be one." Those simple words settled any hesitation she carried. Hallie submitted her application. She went through interviews. She presented her philosophies on justice with clarity and purpose. And when the governor announced her appointment months later, Hallie sat in stunned silence for a moment before tears filled her eyes. She had done it. She had climbed every step. She had turned heartbreak into fuel, struggle into strength, and motherhood into motivation. On the morning of her swearing-in ceremony, Taylor stood beside her in a small, neatly pressed suit. His tie wasn't perfectly straight, but he tugged at it proudly. "Mommy, can I stand right next to you when they give you the thing?" he asked. "You mean when they give me the oath?" she said, smiling. "Yeah, I want to see you become a judge for real." Hallie cupped his cheek gently. "You helped me get here." "No, I didn't," he protested with a shrug. "Yes," she insisted softly. "You did. You always did." The ceremony took place in a modest courtroom filled with the people who had supported her. Family members, church elders, professors, former clients. The judge, presiding over the oath, invited Taylor to stand with his mother. When Hallie raised her right hand and promised to serve with fairness and integrity, Taylor squeezed her other hand tightly, eyes bright with pride. After the oath was completed, applause filled the room. Taylor threw his arms around her waist. "You did it, Mommy." Hallie bent down, hugging him close. "We did it." In that moment, standing on the bench she had worked years to reach, Hallie felt the victory in her bones, not just for herself, but for every challenge she had overcome, every night she pushed through fatigue, every moment she feared she wasn't enough. She was more than enough, and she carried Harlem, her son, and her courage with her into every decision she would make. While Hallie climbed toward justice through grit and purpose, Jeremy Carter followed a very different path, one shaped by ambition, excess, and the pressure to constantly prove himself worthy of the wealth he had grown into. After leaving Hallie all those years ago, he buried himself in work as if the long hours and relentless grind could drown out the guilt he refused to acknowledge. His company, Carter Innovations, began as a modest tech startup, but Jeremy poured every ounce of energy into transforming it into something massive. He thrived in boardrooms, pitched ideas with sharp precision, and made decisions with the confidence of a man who believed he had everything under control. Investors loved him for his boldness. Publications praised him as one of the brightest rising CEOs of his generation. Success became the language he spoke fluently. But beneath all that shine, the cracks were forming. Jeremy ignored the voice inside that whispered reminders of Hallie and the child he had walked away from. He told himself that leaving had been necessary, that stepping back was the only way to avoid dragging her into a life filled with uncertainty and pressure. But deep down, he knew the truth. He ran. He ran from fear, from responsibility, from love. And the guilt of that choice followed him everywhere. Yet he kept building. Years passed, and Carter Innovations expanded into new markets. Jeremy acquired offices across Manhattan, launched software platforms that drew national attention, and hosted conferences that featured his face on massive screens. The world saw a man in control. But Jeremy knew better. His avoidance of personal responsibility seeped into his leadership. Instead of slowing down to check his team's processes, he approved decisions at lightning speed. Instead of holding himself accountable for errors, he quietly shifted the burden onto those beneath him. Instead of addressing ethical concerns when they appeared, he signed off on whatever documents promised the strongest quarterly growth. Focus on expansion, his advisors always told him. Everything else can wait. And he believed them. Loneliness, however, wasn't something he could outrun. The higher he climbed, the more isolated he felt. The noise of success couldn't fill the silence of personal regret. So he convinced himself that commitment to someone new might offer stability, might even distract him from the ache he carried. That's when he got engaged to Morgan. Morgan came from a family prominent in business circles. She was poised, elegant, and intelligent. Their relationship was structured, predictable, built more on compatibility than emotional connection. People saw them together at charity events and assumed they were the perfect couple. But Jeremy never let her in fully. He couldn't. His heart had stopped allowing vulnerability the night he left Hallie behind. Still, Morgan supported his career, attended his events, and tried to bridge the distance she often felt between them. She overlooked his late nights and constant travel, hoping time would soften him. But Jeremy lived inside his own head, focused on building what he believed would secure his legacy. As the company grew, so did the shadow beneath it. Reports came to him, quiet warnings, concerns from team members, hints of financial inconsistencies. But Jeremy brushed many of them aside. "We'll fix it later," he'd say. "Right now, we need momentum." His CFO, a man who had been with him from the early days, grew increasingly uneasy. "Jeremy, these numbers don't add up," he warned during a late evening meeting. "We need to slow down, review everything closely. Some projections were pushed too far. Investors will question this." But Jeremy, exhausted and unwilling to face another conflict, waved the concern away. "I'll sign off on the adjustments tomorrow. Just handle it." "Jeremy." "Please," Jeremy cut in sharply. "I have enough on my plate." Instead of addressing the issues, he pushed the CFO to find ways to keep the growth pattern intact. Every shortcut added tension to their relationship. Every questionable authorization Jeremy approved added weight to the company's foundation. It wasn't long before the flaws in his decisions began to show. First, a quiet rumor surfaced in financial circles, questions about Carter Innovations' aggressive expansion. Then, a journalist reached out requesting documents. Jeremy ignored it. Investors began asking pointed questions. He reassured them with the polished charm he had mastered over the years. But rumors don't die when they're fed with truth. Morgan noticed the change immediately. Jeremy became restless at home, pacing through penthouse rooms late at night while she watched silently from across the room. He drank more coffee, slept less, and stared endlessly at his laptop, as if the numbers on the screen might rearrange and fix themselves. "Talk to me," Morgan urged one night. "You're scaring me. What's going on?" Jeremy forced a smile. "Just work pressure. I'll get ahead of it." But she wasn't convinced. Neither was the CFO. Nor were the investors. And neither, deep down, was Jeremy himself. The pressure mounted until one morning, almost quietly, the CFO resigned. He left behind a simple note: "I can no longer sign off on these decisions." The resignation hit the financial world instantly. Stocks trembled. Reporters surrounded the building. And Jeremy, for the first time in years, felt something he had avoided since leaving Hallie. Panic. Pure, sharp panic. Employees gathered in small circles, whispering. Emails flooded with questions. Investors demanded meetings. Morgan reached for his hand that evening, but he pulled away without meaning to, his mind spinning with too many thoughts. Within days, the government began investigating irregularities in the company's filings. Subpoenas arrived. Attorneys contacted his office with concerns. Then came the moment Jeremy had dreaded most. He was summoned to testify. He stood in his penthouse that night, staring at the document, feeling the weight of every shortcut, every ignored warning, every decision he had made while believing himself untouchable. But the true blow came when he walked into the courtroom and saw the name on the plaque. Judge Hallie Johnson, the woman he abandoned, the woman he hurt, the woman he had never stopped thinking about. Life had brought him back to her, but not the way he imagined. Not as a partner, not as a father claiming his place, not as a redeemed man, but as a defendant, and nothing had ever shook him more. The downfall of Carter Innovations did not begin with a dramatic explosion. It began with a whisper, a quiet rumor that slipped through financial circles and refused to be ignored. An analyst from a private equity firm noticed inconsistencies in quarterly projections. A journalist sent an email asking for clarification on missing data. A minor investor questioned why certain expenses didn't align with revenue reports. At first, the rumors drifted like dust, floating in the background, never quite settling. Jeremy brushed them off. He had bigger meetings to attend, a growing team to oversee, and a reputation to maintain. Yet every time he looked at a financial statement, a pressure pulsed behind his temples, a pressure. He tried to drown in work, the same way he once tried to drown the guilt of abandoning Hallie. But pressure does not disappear because a man looks away. It grows. And this one exploded. The first public blow came when the CFO, the one person who had walked beside Jeremy since the early days, resigned unexpectedly. His departure was quiet in form but deafening in impact. Investors panicked. Employees whispered. Reporters camped outside headquarters hoping for a statement. Jeremy stood in the glass-walled conference room staring at his CFO's empty seat, feeling the edges of control slipping through his fingers. Within 24 hours, media headlines were everywhere. Carter Innovations under review. Financial inconsistencies raise questions. CFO resigns. What did he know? Jeremy tried to host an emergency meeting to calm frightened investors, but his voice shook more than he intended. His hands trembled as he clicked through slides filled with numbers that no longer felt solid. He told them there was nothing to fear, that growth sometimes came with temporary misalignments. But his once commanding tone now carried cracks that investors detected instantly. The next blow came from the government. A formal notice arrived requesting all financial records for the last 5 years. Jeremy read the letter twice, then sank into his chair. His attorney, who had been warning him for months to slow down and examine the books more carefully, pressed a hand to his forehead. "This is serious, Jeremy. They don't make requests like this unless they already suspect something." Jeremy paced the room. "We'll cooperate fully. There's no fraud." "Are you sure?" The question echoed painfully. Was he sure? He had approved countless documents without reading every detail. He had signed forms, trusting his team to ensure accuracy. He had pushed for expansion faster than the company could stabilize. He had built an empire so quickly that he never checked whether the foundation could hold. Now it was giving way beneath him. Morgan tried to comfort him when he got home from the office that night. She placed a hand on his arm gently, her eyes soft with concern. "Talk to me," she said. "What are they saying? Is this going to affect the company?" Jeremy tried to answer, but his voice felt caught between truth and fear. He didn't want her to see how shaken he was. He didn't want anyone to see it, so he forced himself to breathe evenly and reassured her in a tone he barely believed. "It's an audit. It'll pass." But as soon as she turned away, he pressed both hands against the counter, head hanging low, realizing how out of control this had become. Within days, the investigation intensified. Federal agents collected files, emails, transaction histories. They interviewed employees. They compared signatures, authorization stamps, and timelines. Jeremy attended meeting after meeting with legal counsel, each one confirming the same truth. He was in trouble, not because he intentionally orchestrated wrongdoing, but because he had allowed negligence to grow into something larger than he could contain. He had looked at numbers without understanding their implications. He had trusted decisions that needed oversight. He had signed documents that needed scrutiny. And now there was a trail, and his signature was stamped all over it. The media swarmed. Every morning, reporters stood outside his penthouse building waiting for a statement. Every evening, analysts debated his downfall on national news. Some painted him as reckless. Others painted him as incompetent. None of them knew the man behind the headlines, the man who once loved a Harlem daughter and abandoned her in fear. Morgan grew increasingly anxious. She tried to be supportive, but the uncertainty strained their relationship. She wanted transparency, but Jeremy barely slept, barely spoke, barely existed outside crisis mode. One night, she confronted him gently. "Why won't you tell me everything? I'm your fiancé." Jeremy stared at her, swallowing hard. She deserved honesty, but he didn't know how to explain the magnitude of his mistakes, not just at work but in his personal life. He didn't know how to admit that this collapse felt like karma finally catching up. Instead, he whispered, "I just need time." Morgan nodded slowly, but her eyes reflected doubt. Then came the moment that changed everything. Jeremy was officially charged. Financial misconduct, negligent oversight, failure to report fraudulent activity. His attorney placed the document on the table with a sympathetic look. "You have to testify," he said softly. "There's no avoiding this." Jeremy's chest tightened. He nodded, though his mind spun wildly. Days later, he received the court summons. He stared at the envelope for several minutes before opening it, a sense of dread washing over him. He skimmed the first page, standard legal language, dates, requirements. Then he saw it. Presiding Judge, Hallie Johnson. His breath stopped. He read the name again, hands shaking. The woman he left. The mother of the child he walked away from. The one whose heartbreak had fueled her rise. Life had woven him back into her world, but now she was the one holding the authority. Not him, not investors, not the board, her. Jeremy sank into a chair, gripping the summons as though it might crumble in his hands. His vision blurred as the realization settled in his chest. He wasn't just facing charges. He was facing the consequences of every choice he had made since the night he walked out of Hallie's life. And for the first time in his adult life, he couldn't run. When court resumed the next morning, the air inside the courtroom felt heavier than the day before. People filed into the gallery whispering about the previous session, about Jeremy Carter's trembling voice, about the silent tension radiating between judge and defendant, about the strange feeling that something deeper than a corporate trial was unfolding. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that Judge Hallie Johnson and Jeremy Carter carried a shared past heavy enough to shift the weight of the entire room. The clerk called out, "All rise," and the shuffle of chairs filled the chamber as everyone stood. Hallie entered with the same calm grace she had mastered over the years. Her black robe fell perfectly at her sides. Her spine was straight. Her expression was composed, but beneath the surface, emotions she had tightly contained since the day of Jeremy's arrival pushed against the walls she'd built. She took her seat. "Be seated." The courtroom obeyed. Jeremy stepped into view a moment later. His suit looked freshly pressed, but it couldn't hide the fatigue in his eyes or the strain around his jaw. The confident billionaire facade he once wore so effortlessly had faded. Now he looked like a man wrestling with ghosts, his past decisions, his present reality, and the future he stood to lose. "Call your next witness," Hallie instructed, her voice even. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, we call Mr. Franklin, senior accountant for Carter Innovations." As the witness took the stand, Hallie watched him with the cool professionalism expected of a judge. But inside, each testimony struck her differently. Every document revealed, every questionable signature presented, every oversight explained. These weren't just pieces of a corruption case. They were pieces of the man she once trusted. Pieces of the empire he sacrificed integrity to build. Pieces of the reasons she now sat higher while he sat accused. Mr. Franklin explained how financial inconsistencies first appeared, how warnings were ignored, how Jeremy authorized decisions without proper review. His tone was steady, but his words painted a painful picture. Was Mr. Carter aware of the risks? The prosecutor asked. "Yes," the witness replied. "We discussed it multiple times." Jeremy looked down, his hand clenched so tightly the veins in his wrist stood out. Hallie listened without flinching, even when the testimony echoed conversations she remembered from long ago, moments where his confidence overshadowed caution, where ambition overshadowed responsibility. Her expression didn't change, but she felt the weight of every truth. When it was time for the defense to cross-examine, Jeremy's attorney approached the stand, attempting to shift blame onto miscommunication or employee error, but even the attorney's voice lacked conviction. It was clear the evidence wasn't bending in their favor. Throughout it all, Jeremy's gaze occasionally flicked toward Hallie. Each time she kept her eyes on the witness, refusing to meet his stare. She couldn't allow even a moment of distraction. Not today. Not while the integrity of her courtroom depended on her complete neutrality. When the witness stepped down, Hallie reviewed her notes. Next witness. The prosecutor called 2 more employees, both describing similar patterns, warnings dismissed, approvals rushed, concerns ignored. Jeremy shifted uncomfortably, his composure slipping as guilt pressed down heavier with each statement. Then came a moment the courtroom would remember. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "we request permission to introduce Exhibit 27, a series of internal messages acknowledging awareness of financial risks." Hallie looked up. "Proceed." The screen lit up with projected evidence. Messages Jeremy had written late at night, messages showing hesitation, concern, and sometimes denial. Jeremy swallowed hard. One message read, "We cannot afford another delay. Push it through." Another, "We'll fix this later." And the worst one, "I know it's risky. Just get it done." The gallery murmured. Jeremy closed his eyes. Hallie remained still, but inside something cracked, not in judgment, but in recognition. This was the man she once loved, the man who left her out of fear, the man who ran from responsibility, and now, the man whose decisions had spiraled beyond his control. But this was also her courtroom, her rules, her responsibility. "Silence," she said firmly, tapping her gavel once. The murmurs died instantly. The prosecutor turned to her. "Your Honor, the witness list is complete for this session." "Very well," Hallie replied. "We will continue tomorrow at 9. The tension in the room thickened as everyone gathered their belongings. Jeremy remained seated for a moment, staring at the floor as though searching for a version of himself he no longer recognized. Hallie stood and exited the bench with dignified poise. Once inside her chambers, she closed the door gently and exhaled. The walls finally allowed her to feel something other than duty. She sat at her desk, fingertips pressed together, replaying the testimonies in her mind. Logic demanded objectivity. The law required it. But beneath it all, old emotions flickered, a mixture of sorrow, disappointment, and a distant compassion she refused to acknowledge. "Control," she whispered. "You have worked too hard to lose it now." Meanwhile, in the hallway, Jeremy leaned against the wall, trying to steady his breath. His attorney stood beside him. "You need to prepare for your testimony tomorrow," the attorney urged. Jeremy nodded, though he wasn't sure he would survive the emotional weight of tomorrow's questions asked by the woman whose heart he had broken, whose strength now overshadowed him, whose judgment could define the rest of his life. And as he walked away, one truth echoed louder than all the accusations. He wasn't just afraid of losing his company. He was afraid of facing Hallie, fully, finally, completely. The courtroom was silent when Jeremy Carter returned to take the stand. Not the kind of silence that comes from routine proceedings, but the dense, breath-held silence that coils around a room when something irreversible is about to happen. He could feel eyes on him from every direction. Reporters leaned forward. Attorneys studied his posture. Spectators waited with anticipation. And at the center of it all, Judge Hallie Johnson looked down from the bench with an expression that revealed nothing. Not anger, not sympathy, just the steady, disciplined gaze of a woman who had mastered the art of composure. Jeremy sat, his palms sweaty, his heartbeat racing so loudly he wondered if others could hear it. His attorney whispered for him to breathe. But how could he breathe when the woman he once abandoned, pregnant, alone, hopeful, held the authority to question him under oath? "Mr. Carter," Hallie said once the courtroom settled, "are you prepared to testify today?" Her voice was calm, measured, professional. "Yes, Your Honor," Jeremy managed, though his voice wavered. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Let's begin." Jeremy tried to focus, but the lights felt brighter than usual, the walls closer, his throat drier. He swallowed hard as the prosecutor paced slowly, holding a stack of documents. "Mr. Carter, you approved executive decisions that led to the financial discrepancies outlined yesterday. Can you explain your reasoning? Jeremy opened his mouth but hesitated. Every excuse he'd rehearsed felt weak under Hallie's gaze. I believed my team handled the details correctly, he answered. But you signed off without reviewing them? I trusted my staff, he replied, shifting slightly. The prosecutor tapped the papers. Is this your signature? Yes. And this one? Yes. And you claim you were unaware of the risks attached to these approvals. I was aware, but I didn't think the consequences would escalate. Hallie's eyebrow lifted, just slightly, but the motion was enough to pierce through him. The prosecutor leaned in. So you knowingly ignored concerns brought to your attention? I wouldn't say ignored, Jeremy whispered, though the word tasted like the very truth he tried to avoid. Then what would you call it? I deferred action, he said. The gallery murmured. Hallie tapped her gavel once. Silence. Jeremy stared down, heat prickling his neck. His mind drifted, unbidden, to years earlier, when love had been simple and he had held Hallie's hand on late-night walks, when he promised he would take care of her, when she trusted him so deeply that she cried with joy at the idea of building a family with him. A flashback surged through him, Hallie laughing softly on a balcony, her hand resting on her belly. The skyline behind her, her voice full of faith. I know you'll be a good father, Jeremy. He blinked rapidly, the memory slamming into him like a punch to the chest. He had broken her trust, and now he was facing the consequences of a different kind of brokenness, one he created in his business, shaped by the same avoidance that ruined their past. The prosecutor continued. You approved financial strategies that your CFO explicitly warned against. Why? I wanted progress, he said, struggling. I thought we could adjust later. You prioritized growth over legality? I didn't see it that way at the time. But that is what happened, correct? Jeremy's voice cracked. Yes. The gallery reacted again. Hallie maintained control with a firm tap of the gavel. The prosecutor pressed on. When irregularities surfaced, why didn't you halt expansion? I thought stopping would cause panic. Did panic not happen anyway? Jeremy flinched, unable to respond. Hallie watched everything. Her face remained neutral, but beneath the robe her heart beat with conflicting emotions, anger at the harm he caused others, sorrow at the man he became, and the faint sting of memories she never invited back. When the prosecutor finished, Hallie nodded. Defense may cross-examine. Jeremy's attorney approached, but his tone lacked confidence. Mr. Carter, isn't it true that you relied heavily on your executive team and therefore were not directly malicious in your actions? Yes, Jeremy answered. I didn't intend harm. And isn't it true that rapid growth in business can create situations that are difficult to manage? Yes. And would you say you did your best under challenging circumstances? Jeremy hesitated. His eyes drifted to Hallie, who stared back steadily. The truth sat heavy in his mouth. My best? Jeremy whispered. No, I didn't do my best. His attorney's eyes widened slightly. The gallery shifted, but Jeremy continued, voice trembling with a raw honesty that surprised even himself. I avoided responsibilities because I was afraid of failing. I didn't look closely enough. I didn't ask enough questions. I didn't hold myself accountable. And people trusted me. They deserved better. Hallie felt something inside her chest tighten, not sympathy exactly, but recognition. These were the same flaws that tore their past apart. The prosecutor stepped forward. No further questions. Jeremy's attorney stepped back, surrendering. Hallie cleared her throat softly. Mr. Carter, I have a few questions. Jeremy's heart dropped. This moment, felt like standing at the edge of a cliff he created. Mr. Carter, Hallie began, based on your testimony, do you acknowledge that your negligence contributed directly to the financial harm experienced by your investors and employees? Yes, Your Honor, he said quietly. Do you acknowledge that warnings were presented to you clearly and repeatedly? Yes. And do you accept responsibility for not acting on those warnings? A tear slipped down his cheek. Yes, he whispered. The gallery fell silent. For Hallie, asking these questions was like reopening doors she had long closed. But she had to. Not for their history, but for justice. She assessed him carefully, her eyes carrying the wisdom she gained through years of struggle and triumph. No further questions, she said, her voice steady despite the storm within. Jeremy stepped down from the stand shaking, feeling stripped bare, not by the Prosecutor, not by the defense, but by Hallie's firm, unrelenting truth. Morgan watched from a distance, her hand pressed against her chest, her mind spinning. Jeremy looked haunted, broken, and there was something in the way he looked at the judge, something personal, something heavy, that made her realize this trial wasn't only a legal reckoning. It was emotional, deep, history-laced. Something was wrong. She just didn't know what, yet. The final day of the trial arrived with a heaviness that settled over the courthouse like a low cloud. Reporters crowded the steps outside, microphones pointed toward attorneys who refused to comment. Inside, spectators filled every available seat, knowing they were about to witness a fall from corporate grace, one that had become more gripping than any headline could capture. Jeremy sat at the defense table, hands clasped tightly, trying to maintain his composure. He hadn't slept much. His thoughts had spiraled through memories, regrets, and unanswered questions. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Hallie, her expression steady, her gaze impossible to read, her presence a reminder of everything he ruined. But today wasn't about their past. It was about judgment, a judgment he had earned. Hallie entered the courtroom, calm and deliberate, wearing her robe like armor. Her stride was confident, her posture unwavering. Yet underneath, she battled a quiet storm of emotion. She had waited years for closure, but she hadn't expected it to come in the form of presiding over his downfall. Still, justice came before emotion. Always. The clerk's voice rang out. "All rise." Everyone stood. "You may be seated," Hallie said. Silence swallowed the room. She lifted the case file, flipping through pages she had reviewed a dozen times already. Evidence, testimonies, financial statements, emails. The picture of negligence had been painted clearly. Even Jeremy had stopped denying his role. His testimony the previous day revealed the guilt he had tried so long to bury. Hallie's eyes swept the room before she spoke. After reviewing the evidence presented, she began, "This court must weigh not only the intent behind the actions, but the impact of those actions." Jeremy's pulse quickened. "Mr. Carter," she continued, her voice unwavering, "your decisions allowed misconduct to grow unchecked. Despite warnings from your own senior staff, you chose to prioritize growth over responsibility. The consequences have affected investors, employees, and the integrity of your corporation." Jeremy swallowed, the words cutting deeper than any accusation had before. "However," Hallie added, "you did not act with malicious intent. The evidence shows negligence, not deception. The law draws a line between intentional fraud and reckless oversight, and that distinction matters." The courtroom murmured, but Hallie tapped her gavel lightly. Silence returned at once. Jeremy's attorney leaned in close, whispering, "This is the best you can hope for." But Jeremy couldn't respond. His eyes were fixed on Hallie, on the woman who had once trusted him with her whole future. His heart thudded painfully. Hallie continued reading from her notes. "Given the severity of the financial damage, the court imposes the following sentence." Jeremy's breath caught. 1. A personal fine of $2 million to be paid toward restitution funds for affected employees. He blinked rapidly, absorbing the blow. 2. You are barred from holding any executive or financial oversight role for the next 5 years. The courtroom buzzed with soft gasps. To some, it sounded lenient. To others, harsh. To Jeremy, it felt like the collapse of the identity he'd built since the day he walked out on Hallie. But she wasn't finished. 3. You will undergo mandatory ethics training and serve community hours with an organization supporting economic justice. Jeremy nodded slowly. Shame warmed his skin, but there was something else beneath it, a faint sense of relief. Relief that someone had finally forced him to face himself. Relief that the punishment wasn't prison. Relief that maybe, just maybe, there was a path to redemption if he chose to walk it. Hallie closed the file. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice softening only by a fraction, "your actions carried consequences far beyond numbers on a page. I hope this experience teaches the value of responsibility, not only in business, but in life." Jeremy's eyes glistened. "Yes, Your Honor." For a heartbeat, the courtroom faded away. It was just the two of them, standing in the quiet shadow of a love that had broken long ago. Hallie saw the man he had become, flawed, bruised, humbled. Jeremy saw the woman she had become, resilient, powerful, everything he once feared he'd never deserve. But the moment passed quickly. "This court is adjourned." Hallie lifted her gavel and brought it down with a clean, definitive strike. The sound echoed across the room. cutting through every lingering thought and closing the case with finality. It was the sound of an empire falling, a future shifting, a reckoning completed. People rose from their seats. Reporters scrambled for position. Attorneys packed their documents. Jeremy didn't move. His attorney touched his shoulder. "We should go," but Jeremy sat still, staring at the bench where Hallie had just been. His chest tightened. His throat burned. The weight of consequences settled fully into his bones, not just the legal punishment, but the emotional one. He whispered to himself, "I did this, all of it." He stood slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. As he walked down the center aisle, people watched him the way crowds watch a fallen figure, curious, pitying, judgmental. He didn't care. His mind was somewhere else entirely. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt strangely quiet despite the chatter around him. His legs nearly gave out, so he leaned against the wall, pressing his palm flat against the cool surface. Tears blurred his vision, not from fear, but from the realization that the punishment Hallie gave him was merciful compared to what he had done to her. His company had collapsed. His reputation was stained. But losing her all those years ago, that was the wound he had never admitted was fatal. He wiped his face quickly when he heard footsteps approaching. Morgan came into view, eyes wide with concern. "Jeremy?" she whispered. He looked at her, but the exhaustion in his gaze told her more than any explanation could. Her lips parted. "Why? Do I feel like the courtroom wasn't the only place you were on trial today?" Jeremy didn't answer. He wasn't ready. Not yet. He turned away, exhaling shakily, realizing that everything he once thought was unbreakable had shattered, and Hallie Johnson had been the final reminder of who he was, who he had become, and who he could no longer pretend to be. The hallway outside the courtroom had emptied slowly after Hallie announced the final adjournment, but its quiet held an echo of everything that had just happened. Jeremy leaned against the wall, exhausted, shaken, trying to absorb the weight of the verdict. He had expected humiliation. He had expected anger. He had expected loss. But he hadn't expected the strange feeling of relief mixed inside the damage. He felt stripped and exposed, as if the trial had peeled back layers he had avoided for years. His attorney hovered near him, papers tucked into his arm, but Jeremy barely heard a word. His thoughts were trapped in a loop. Her voice, her judgment, her strength, and everything he had done to her. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to stand upright. Morgan approached him cautiously, uncertainty written across her expression. She opened her mouth to speak, probably to ask the questions that had been building since. The trial began, but before she could, the double doors at the end of the hallway opened, and the hallway stopped breathing. A young boy in a little suit, jacket slightly too big, tie slightly crooked, walked in with confident steps only a child could have. His smile lit up the dim hallway. His gaze darted around, searching for someone. He spotted Hallie first. "Mommy," his voice echoed. Jeremy froze. Morgan blinked. The attorney stepped back. Time thickened. Hallie turned, her robe still flowing behind her from the courtroom. Her face softened instantly, the kind of softness Jeremy remembered from years ago, the kind of softness she used to reserve only for him. And then she did something that shattered the remnants of Jeremy's world. She knelt and opened her arms. Taylor ran straight to her, burying his face in her shoulder. She hugged him tightly, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. Jeremy's breath left his lungs. A child, her child, their child, and he knew it before anyone spoke. The resemblance hit him like a blow. Taylor's nose, his eyes, the shape of his face. Pieces of Jeremy reflected in a boy he had never met, never held, never supported. His hand rose to his chest instinctively. His throat burned. The hallway blurred around him. For the first time in years, he felt something he could not hide beneath confidence or charm. Shame. Deep, crushing, undeniable. Morgan watched, confusion washing over her. "Hallie has a son." "Jeremy, did you know she had a son?" Jeremy didn't answer. Couldn't. His eyes remained locked on the child who looked like a small mirror of his younger self. Hallie stood slowly, holding Taylor's hand. Then she walked toward Jeremy. Every step tightened the knot in his stomach. Taylor looked up at his mother, then at the man in front of them, curiosity sparkling. In his warm brown eyes that carried Jeremy's shape and Hallie's depth. Hallie's expression remained steady, But Jeremy saw the emotion beneath her professionalism. The years between them, the betrayal, the silence, the strength she built without him, it all gathered behind her eyes. She stopped just a few feet away. Her voice was calm, clear, controlled. "Jeremy," she said softly, "meet our son, Taylor." Jeremy staggered, not physically, but emotionally. Every memory, every regret, every reason he left came crashing down. His mouth opened, but no sound escaped. His chest tightened so sharply he pressed a hand over his heart, trying to steady himself. Taylor blinked up at him. "Hi," he said sweetly. Jeremy's legs nearly gave out. "Taylor," Hallie coaxed gently. "This is Jeremy Carter." Taylor studied him. "Mommy talks about responsibility sometimes. Are you one of the people who doesn't listen when they should?" Jeremy's breath hitched. A small, choked sound escaped him. Not a laugh, not a cry, just a painful release of something heavy. Hallie winced slightly. "Baby, we'll talk about that at home." But Jeremy shook his head weakly. "No, he's right." Morgan stepped back. "Jeremy, what is happening? Why does he look like—" Jeremy turned to her slowly, eyes filled with the truth he had avoided for a decade. "He's my son." Morgan's lips parted in shock. She took a step away, the realization striking her too quickly to process. The betrayal wasn't romantic, it was truth withheld. But Jeremy's focus wasn't on Morgan. His entire world was focused on the little boy watching him with innocent curiosity. He lowered himself to his knees without thinking. He needed to meet Taylor where he was. He needed to make himself smaller. He needed to show the humility he should have shown years ago. Taylor tilted his head. "Are you okay?" Jeremy's voice cracked. "I didn't know how to be okay. Not for a long time." Hallie's eyes softened just slightly. Jeremy swallowed, tears gathering. "Taylor, I'm your dad." The boy blinked, processing. "My dad?" Jeremy nodded. "Yes. And I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm sorry I hurt your mom. I'm sorry for everything." His voice trembled with years of buried guilt erupting at once. Taylor looked at Hallie, then back at Jeremy. "Can dads try again?" Jeremy broke. Completely. He leaned forward, tears falling freely. "If your mom allows it, if you allow it, I want to try. I want to learn how to be the father you deserve." Hallie's throat tightened. She had prepared herself for anger, for confrontation, for bitterness. But she hadn't prepared herself for the raw sincerity in his voice. For the first time, Jeremy wasn't running. He was facing everything he had once fled. Taylor stepped closer and touched Jeremy's shoulder gently. "It's okay. Everybody makes mistakes. Mommy says what matters is what you do next." Jeremy looked up at Hallie, devastated, humbled, hopeful. Hallie inhaled deeply. "We'll discuss what comes next." But this, today, needed to happen. Jeremy nodded, still kneeling. For the first time in 10 years, forgiveness didn't feel impossible. It felt like the beginning of something new. The hallway had settled into a quiet hum, lawyers leaving, clerks shuffling papers, the muffled sound of doors closing one by one. But inside the small circle formed by Hallie, Jeremy, and Taylor, the world felt suspended, like everyone else existed on a different frequency. Jeremy stayed on his knees because standing felt wrong. It felt like something someone confident would do, someone who hadn't disappeared when life needed him most. So he stayed low, where honesty lived, where accountability couldn't hide behind status or wealth. Taylor studied him with the innocent seriousness only children could possess. His little fingers played with the edge of his blazer sleeve while he processed the revelation that reshaped his world. Hallie remained steady, one hand resting reassuringly on Taylor's shoulder. Her expression was controlled, but emotion flickered beneath the surface. Disbelief at the moment finally happening, pride in Taylor's composure, and a quiet storm of memories that still lived inside her. Jeremy finally lifted his gaze to her. "Hallie, may I talk to him? Really talk to him?" Hallie hesitated, not because she wanted to block the moment, but because she needed to frame it. Structure was her safety. Each decision she'd made since Taylor's birth had been deliberate, measured, built to protect him. She gave a slow nod. "You may, but I'm staying right here." Jeremy accepted that instantly. "Of course." Taylor stepped forward, small shoes tapping lightly against the tile. Jeremy tried to smile, but his fear crept through the cracks. The boy stopped at arm's length, giving Jeremy space while still acknowledging the connection he sensed but had never known. "Hi." Taylor said softly. Jeremy's throat tightened. "Hi, Taylor." "You cried," Taylor said matter-of-factly. "Grown-ups cry when something big happens." Jeremy swallowed. "This is the biggest moment of my life." Taylor nodded thoughtfully. "Mommy says big moments make you stronger." Jeremy glanced at Hallie. Her jaw tightened, not from disapproval but from being unexpectedly moved. She wasn't ready to show that yet, though. Not after all the years she held herself together alone. "Taylor," Jeremy said gently, "I want to tell you the truth. Your mom deserved better back then, and so did you. I was scared, I was selfish, and I convinced myself running was easier than facing responsibility. It wasn't an excuse. It was a failure. My failure." Taylor listened closely, head slightly tilted. Jeremy continued, voice thick. "I thought success would make me whole. But today, your mom showed me something I needed to see. She showed me what real strength looks like." Hallie looked away, blinking fast. She hated crying in professional spaces, and this hallway had already seen enough of her emotions. Jeremy kept going. "I can't change the past, Taylor, but I want to be present now. I want to learn your world, your routines, what makes you laugh, what you like, what you don't. I want to earn a place in your life." Taylor shifted his weight. "Mommy always says earning things matters more than having things." Jeremy gave a small, trembling nod. "She's right." Hallie stepped forward slightly. "Taylor, do you have any questions you want to ask him?" Taylor thought for a moment. "Were you afraid to meet me?" Jeremy answered honestly. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I didn't think I deserved to." Taylor processed the answer quietly. It was the kind of straightforward truth children appreciated, direct, without decorations. He finally said, "Well, I don't think you have to be afraid now." Jeremy broke into a quiet, emotional laugh, wiping his face. "Thank you." A silence settled between them, not heavy, but reflective. Hallie finally moved closer, her robe swishing around her ankles. "Taylor, I think we should talk about what happens next." Jeremy stood slowly, still maintaining a respectful distance. He faced Hallie with the posture of someone ready to accept whatever boundaries came. Hallie spoke calmly, clearly, with the authority of a judge, but the heart of a mother. "Jeremy, I believe today opened a door that needed to open, but moving forward requires structure, not emotion alone, not promises alone." Jeremy nodded. "Tell me what you need." Hallie held Taylor's hand gently as she spoke. "First, visitation. Taylor will not be rushed into anything. You'll meet him in small, supervised settings at first, public places he feels comfortable." Jeremy agreed immediately. "Of course." "Second," she continued, "a trust fund will be established. Taylor's education and future must be secure. I don't want a dollar in my name. This is for him." Jeremy didn't hesitate. "Done." "Third," Hallie said, her voice softening, "I need consistency from you, not gestures, not a burst of effort, real consistency. Taylor cannot afford disappointment." Morgan listened from behind, arms crossed, not in anger, but in the stunned acceptance that her world had shifted too. Jeremy inhaled deeply. "You have my word, Hallie. And I don't mean the word I broke 10 years ago. I mean the truth I'm ready to live now." Taylor squeezed Hallie's hand. "Mommy." "Yes, baby." "Can I see him again? Not today, but soon." Hallie looked at her son, her heart swelling with both pride and caution. "Yes. We can arrange that." Jeremy nearly collapsed from relief. "Thank you." Taylor took one step forward. "I want to tell you something." Jeremy leaned down slightly. "Anything?" Taylor reached out and took Jeremy's hand, small fingers curling around the edges of a man who had never held them before. "I think everybody deserves a chance to do better," Taylor whispered. Hallie closed her eyes for a moment. That simple sentence carried everything she had taught him, everything she had lived through, everything she hoped he would inherit. Jeremy's breath trembled. "I won't waste it." The hallway grew warm with an emotion that wasn't forgiveness yet, but wasn't anger either. It was something new, tentative hope. Hallie exhaled slowly. "We take this one step at a time." Jeremy nodded. "I'll follow your lead." Taylor gave a small smile. "Mommy's good at leading." Jeremy returned the smile. "I know." Hallie felt a shift deep inside her, a quiet acceptance that accountability was beginning, not ending. A reflective pause settled over them, and in that moment, Flora places your CTA naturally and softly. To everyone listening to this story, moments like these remind us that growth begins when honesty replaces pride. If you're still watching, tap the like button and comment "Growth starts today" to help this message reach more people. Taylor tugged at Hallie's sleeve. "Can we go home now?" "Yes, baby," she said gently. As they turned to leave, Jeremy watched them with a mix of awe and determination. He didn't just see what he lost, he saw what he wanted to earn, slowly, humbly, genuinely. And for the first time in his adult life, Jeremy Carter felt something he didn't recognize at first, a chance to rebuild, not an empire but himself. For days after that hallway moment, Hallie felt herself moving through life with a new rhythm, steady, guarded, but undeniably changed. The trial was over, her docket was full again, and her robe once more symbolized the impartiality she was sworn to uphold. Yet outside court, life had quietly shifted. The past she once buried beneath late-night study sessions, court journals, and motherly routines was now standing in the doorway of her future, wearing a hesitant smile and holding the hand of a boy he barely knew but desperately wanted to. Taylor noticed the shift too. He wasn't confused or overwhelmed. If anything, he seemed calmer, as though he had solved a mystery he didn't know he was carrying. He still woke up eager for school, still asked for extra syrup on his waffles, still hummed Harlem church hymns while tying his shoes. But each morning he asked a new question. "Mommy, do you think I'll see him this weekend? Mommy, do you think he likes basketball? Mommy, does he know my favorite color?" These questions carried no resentment, only curiosity, the kind that came naturally to a child who somehow sensed that this man mattered. Hallie handled each question with the same gentle balance she used in the courtroom. "Taylor, we're taking things one step at a time. Taylor, he's learning about your world now. Yes, baby, he wants to get to know everything about you." She didn't rush hope into the room, but she didn't block it either. Their first arranged meeting took place on a mild Saturday afternoon at a small reading garden near the library. It was Hallie's idea, neutral, public, familiar to Taylor, and far away from the overwhelming flash of Midtown. She wanted an environment where Taylor felt confident and where Jeremy could let down the walls he built around his emotions. When Jeremy arrived, he looked different. Not in clothing, he still wore the crisp shirt and neat slacks, but in energy. His posture wasn't stiff, his expressions weren't rehearsed. The weight of court and scandal had stripped away the arrogance that once clung to him like a second skin. Now, he looked like a man showing up for something real. Taylor spotted him first. "There he is," he whispered, excitement sneaking into his tone. Hallie followed his gaze. Jeremy stood near the garden entrance, hands tucked awkwardly in his pockets, scanning. For them, with the nerves of someone walking into a test he didn't want to fail. Taylor didn't run to him, not out of fear, but out of respect for the unknown. He walked over slowly, letting Jeremy come the rest of the way. "Hi," Taylor said. Jeremy crouched a little. "Hi, buddy." Silence hovered, but not an uncomfortable one, more like a pause on a blank page. Then Taylor held up a book. "Want to read with me?" "Mommy and I start chapter 3 today." Jeremy smiled, relief softening his features. "I'd love that." The three of them, judge, child, former billionaire, sat together on a bench beneath a small canopy of leaves. Hallie observed quietly as Taylor leaned naturally toward Jeremy, pointing out words he enjoyed, pausing to ask questions and glancing occasionally at his mother to make sure she approved. She always did. Jeremy followed along, stumbling only when his voice caught on certain words because Taylor turned to him with those wondering, trusting eyes. By the time they finished the chapter, Taylor was comfortable enough to ask, "Do you like reading?" Jeremy chuckled lightly. "Honestly, I used to rush through everything, but reading with you, I think I like it now." Taylor's grin widened, missing tooth and all. Hallie felt something inside her settle, something that had been tense for 10 long years. As weeks passed, the meetings became routine. Sometimes they played chess at the community center. Sometimes they ate lunch at the small diner near Hallie's building. Once, Jeremy attended Taylor's school recital, sitting discreetly in the back row. His hands clenched so tightly Hallie thought he might snap his own fingers. But when Taylor spotted him after the show and ran over with, "Did you hear me sing?" Jeremy nearly melted. "I heard every note," he said, voice soft. For Hallie, these moments didn't erase the past. They didn't rewrite history, but they did soften the sharp edges of memory. She still remembered the letter left in the kitchen. She still remembered late nights alone, the ache of abandonment, the fear of raising a child without support. None of that vanished, But now she also saw a man trying, genuinely, slowly, humbly, to repair what he broke. She respected the effort, not because she owed him forgiveness, but because Taylor deserved stability and truth. One evening, after a particularly smooth visit, Taylor skipped ahead on the sidewalk, leaving Hallie and Jeremy walking side by side at a respectful distance. "Hallie," Jeremy said quietly, "thank you." "You don't have to thank me." "I do," he insisted. "You could have shut the door. You didn't." Hallie breathed out slowly. "I didn't do it for you." "I know," he said with sincere acceptance. "But I'm grateful anyway." There was no romantic tension between them, not yet, maybe not ever. What existed now was an early version of trust, built from accountability rather than charm. Jeremy no longer looked at her with entitlement. He looked at her with respect. She appreciated that more than she expected. Taylor glanced back at them. "Come on, you two walk slow." Hallie smiled. Jeremy did too. For the first time in years, they moved forward in sync. As the season shifted into early spring, a family pattern began forming, not the kind held together by romance or longing, but the kind built by presence and consistent care. Taylor thrived under it. His teachers noticed he smiled more. His coach said he listened better. His grandmother commented that he hummed new tunes. And Hallie? She felt lighter. Not because Jeremy redeemed himself, but because she had released a weight she carried alone for too long. Forgiveness wasn't an eraser. It was a door, one she chose to walk through. On a gentle Sunday evening, as Hallie tucked Taylor into bed, he looked up at her with earnest dark eyes. "Mommy, are we a family now?" She smoothed his curls. "We've always been a family, baby. But is he part of it?" Hallie paused, choosing her words with care. "He's learning how to be," she said. "And you're helping him?" Taylor smiled proudly. "I think he's doing good." Hallie kissed his forehead. "I think so too." As she turned off the light, Taylor added softly, "Mommy, thank you for giving him a chance." Hallie stood still for a moment, feeling the full truth of those words. "Good night, sweetheart," she whispered. In the quiet hallway, she let herself breathe deeply. Not every beginning is loud. Some arrive softly, like a second chance stepping into the room. And with that, the story she fought so hard to write alone became a story she finally didn't have to carry by herself. Before you go, take a moment to think about forgiveness, growth, and second chances. If this story touched you, tap the like button, subscribe, and share a lesson you learned today. Your reflection might help someone else heal